want those?
I have no preference. Good morning, everyone, to this well-lit, pretty snowy day. We received our hard copies of the PVR report for the year, which is always a very important occasion here in Ways and Means. Thank you, Ms. Remick, for bringing us in. So we're going to talk about the property valuation report and secondary residence report. And then at 11, we're going to get our chance to ask questions about the childcare financing study that we had a presentation on yesterday. And then after lunch, we're going to talk about the miscellaneous tax bill and tax increment financing district. So we're like really starting to dive in deeper this week. And that's fun, but please feel free to like stop, pause, ask if context is lost the way we lost it for a moment yesterday. So with that, I don't know how you all want to organize yourselves today, but feel free to organize yourselves. Welcome. Okay. Do we have a presentation?
I sent the link to the report. I'm literally just going to walk you folks through the report.
Love it. Thank you.
It's beautifully done by not myself as far as the layout goes. We have a team of folks who did a really nice job. Good morning. My name is Jill Remick. I'm the Director of Property Valuation and Review, which is a division in the tax department. Our role is we work with municipalities to basically administer everything related to statewide education property tax. We do an annual report. It's been a statutory requirement for as long as PVR has been in existence. It has a lot of really helpful sort of statewide information. I'm just going to walk you folks through it because I think it's really helpful to see and hear the different pieces that we work on with your local officials that you may not even be aware of, to give some context and some information about what the data is showing us this year, some of the other roles that PVR plays that are related to pieces that folks work on. And then we also do, for this report, we do a pretty massive data collection with a lot of really sort of helpful breakdowns and charts. And those I also sent along, they're part of our report. They're called the supplemental data. So there's, if you want to look at current use savings by town, effective tax rates, property tax credits, things like that, at the more granular level, that is all available on our website in the link from this report. So I guess we'll get started. Yeah, so there's a lot in here. Thanks to Chloe Wexler and Angela Matreau, who are, Chloe is probably a name some of you might be familiar with. She was at Joint Fiscal Office and we've stolen her at the tax department. We're really happy to have her. So she took on the monumental task of sort of reformatting our annual report and modernizing and cleaning up some of the data. And then she worked with Angela and our communications team to lay it out. So I did include sort of a letter from the director at the beginning. Part of the statutory requirement for the report is if the director has any legislative recommendations. I think that was actually, frankly, from when PVR, when it was first created, was not even part of the tax department. It was its own sort of state division. They had a building in Waterbury, on Randall Street, apparently. So I think a lot of it is probably ground we tread last week when we talked about the demand for reappraisals and the need for assessors who can do this work and the challenges that municipalities are facing and finding folks to do not only the day-to-day listing and assessing and grand list maintenance, but also to find firms who are able to do reappraisals. So I think that's largely repeating what we've talked about in the past. We also sort of go further into the shared services model, which are sort of options that towns have currently to work together to try to share services. And we have heard a lot of interest from towns this past year and then really ramped up in the last couple of weeks who are genuinely interested in trying to work together to find folks to do the work. Because if they can band together and have a shared contract to do reappraisals, they might get more responses to their requests. The contractor might be more willing to come and do that work. I'm also really happy to say, even since I spoke with you folks last week, I've gotten emails and phone calls from people out in the field who are interested in, hey, I hear the state is looking for appraisers, and I am a real estate appraiser, and I was real busy the last couple of years, but now I'm looking to make a change. What do I need to do? Folks graduating from college who are looking into like, hey, what would I need to do to become certified? So I really appreciate the airtime this is getting because it is reaching folks.
I think it was the most watched portion of our work so far. And I'm actually curious if someone is interested in going into that profession, what should they do?
Right, so there's.
I've had constituents ask me. before.
Yeah, no, and I feel like I need to sort of have a game plan. So I think maybe if I get a chance today, I'll pull it together so I can have it at the ready. But there are no, if somebody is elected to the position, obviously they don't have to have any certification or requirements. But there is a real estate appraisal license through the Secretary of State's office. And that's where a lot of folks who might do like a bank appraisal, if you're doing a home equity loan or refinance or something like that, or inspections, things like that, they have to have that license through the Secretary of State's office. Part of PVR's charge is we actually do have a certification program that PVR administers, and it has 4 levels. So there's sort of like an entry and then level 2, level 3, and level 4 for a certified Vermont property appraiser. So every year we have, a dozen or so folks who sort of go through that program. We put on trainings, both in person and frankly, over the last few years, we've done a lot more online and we've reached a lot more people. So they basically need to attend some of those courses and pass them, and then submit that to us, and then they get their certification. And then they'll get added to our list on our website so that the towns will say, oh, I need an appraiser, I'm gonna look for whomever. And they can say, yes, I have the certification from PVR. So I think the first step right now, like short answer, is to email me and I can send folks to that link. And then a huge part of our training component is courses that are offered nationally from the International Association of Assessing Officials, IAAO. We actually contract with the Vermont Assessors and Listers Association and VLCT to host some of those trainings. And they're all available as webinars. A lot of them are live trainings. They're real instructors who are actually carrying this out. And there are tests at the end of those. So it's sort of a combination of the pieces that PVR hosts, and then there are these IAAO courses, depending on how high in the certification chain folks want to participate. So, yeah. So, I think I'm happy to see the interest in it. And I know we do still do one data collection course a year because it's a pretty intense 4-day on-site, like here's how you would walk through a property and make evaluations. They're going to use my house next week to do this for the class.
Thank you.
The dog might have to come to work with me. So because that is like one of the few ones that was really harder to do online, and we had a 45 head count cap for that class, and we had 50 people on the waiting list. So we're going to offer another one this summer, because when you offer something once a year in person now, it's unlikely and it's 4 days in a row, 4 full days. So we need to offer a second one this summer because there's so much interest. But the webinars, we record all those and put them on our website. So if folks can't make it in person on those, they'll be able to access them. So definitely one of the upsides of the last couple of years is we have pivoted, as have we all, to offering things online, and we have been able to reach a lot more people. We can regularly host 100 people on a webinar, whereas we used to go to the Londonderry town office and fit 20 people in, and Sandra would make cookies, and that was how we met up with people. So they can start with emailing me, and I can send them the information on the certified property appraiser. Thanks. All right, so if you're interested, on page 7 is just sort of an overview of all the things PVR. So it just sort of lists all the different pieces we do. So like I said, a huge amount of the work that we do is maintaining the statewide education grand list with municipalities. We also are statutorily required to provide lister education and training. We do a huge part of what we do is the annual equalization study that results in the CLAs, the CODs, and the reappraisal orders that we talked about last week. It's a massive data analysis done in partnership with each of the towns, where we're looking at listed values and then property transfer returns to see what the real estate market is doing. And we conduct that over a 3-year window. Each year we do that. And we do exclude outliers or extremes. There's a subjectivity, and then also like a sort of data analysis piece that really makes sure we're only including in that study arm's length transactions that can be reflective of fair market value. So that's a huge amount of work that we do in partnership with the towns, and I'm happy to say we did it this year for the first time in our new Grand List software program called VTPI. So since Act 60 and Act 68 passed, we've been using the same software system to carry out this work. And every year in about December, as it was wrapping up, it would get really squirrely and only one person could be in the database at a time. So folks were booking when they could get in there to do their work. And now it's a live online system. The listers log in with their credentials. We log in with ours, and we're looking at the same information. So I think there was a lot of anxiety and trepidation about going to a new software system. My staff and listers, it was sort of like, please fix this. This is terrible, but also don't change anything because we're really afraid of what you're going to, what's going to happen. So I'm really thrilled and impressed that my staff and the towns were able to complete this on time this year in the new system. I don't want to jinx it too much because we now are moving into phase 2 where we're rolling out homestead declaration processing, current use processing, things like that. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later in the report. Like I said, we play an advisory role in the reappraisal process. There are requirements if towns are under order by the director for the reappraisal. We have to approve their plans, but a town can conduct a reappraisal on their own whenever they wish. We also oversee the current use program. We have, depending on the day, 4 to 5 staff people who are dedicated to the current use program. Which is a pretty massive undertaking, right? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of interaction with towns, landowners, our partners at Forest Parks and Recreation, our partners at the Agency of Agriculture to administer the program. I'll go into that a little bit more too, because it's as with everything, it's been a record couple of years for real estate changing hands. We also do oversight of statutory property tax exemptions and review those every year. There are both the statutory statewide exemptions and then there can be locally voted exemptions as well. So we advise and review and work with towns to make sure that they're reflecting those accurately. We also obviously want them to share and then have them collect the statewide education property taxes. We also hear property tax appeals. So if a property owner wishes to appeal their valuation, they can appeal to the lister. If they want to go beyond the lister, they go to their Board of Civil Authority. If they're not satisfied at that point, they can appeal either to the director of PBR or Superior Court. And the idea being that it's $70 to appeal to the PBR director, and I think it's $200 to appeal to Superior Court. So larger commercial business appeals tend to go to the Superior Court route. But we hear a lot of the sort of residential, smaller claims kind of thing. And we see about 80 of those every year. And I'll explain that a little bit more. We also hand out the money that the legislature has appropriated for towns to get every year. There's several municipal grant programs that we administer every year. We'll go through those. And then, like I said, there's also just some summary data, not only in this report, but then also on the webpage about education and municipal property tax rates, what the grand list is doing and how that's changed over time, savings and program costs associated with current use. We do have some information about property tax credits, and I'll certainly defer to Jake if you have any more specific questions about the statewide picture there. And then even though PBR no longer directly oversees the real estate transaction taxes, those are housed in taxpayer services. We certainly do include them in the report because it's all pretty relative to what we do. And then we also will, I'll also walk you folks through the land use change tax, which is the penalty for withdrawing or developing land in current use. Or if you want to remove the lien from your property and it's not a penalty, you just want to take the lien off, you can pay the land use change tax as well. And I did want to add, as Chloe pointed out, because this has changed significantly, we've consolidated a lot of information. If there is something specific that you folks are looking for that you're not seeing, please let us know and we can make sure to add it or get it to you. All right, so like I said, page 8, the data exchange between the municipalities and the state is, it's quite a fascinating dance, frankly. And like I said, I'm really pleased. We worked really hard over several years to pick a vendor that we felt confident that we could replace the Grand List software system. It was really an aging system. It had been sort of obsolete for quite a while. And we're really happy with Axiomatic as the vendor that we went with. They work in New Hampshire, New Mexico, South Dakota. Before we selected them, we actually went over to New Hampshire and spent the day with our counterparts there. We flew to Indiana and other places too. Again, this was pre-COVID, to talk to other states and who they use for their vendors, and are really happy that we went with Axiomatic for our VT Pi system. So we are right smack in the middle of it. So like I said, this first past year, we did the equalization study in there, which is significant. And this annual report sort of reflects some data that came out of the new VT Pi system and some that was still from the legacy Access databases, just to add to the fun. But next year, it'll all be out of VT Pi. It was a very low cost system. So for a 5-year for the 5-year contract that we have right now, it was just over 2 million, which is pretty good considering it's a statewide data system. It's actually the least expensive of the vendors that responded, but they're doing a great job. So basically, the listers are responsible for establishing the values in their local appraisal system at the local level, and then feeding that data in, the grand list data into our statewide system. So there's a lot of back and forth between the municipalities and PBR on a pretty regular basis. It's absolutely a mission critical system. It not only aggregates the grand list data, we administer current use through that, like I said. Everything that the town is going to need to print their property tax bills is going to come to them through the system. They can print it right out of this system if they want to literally print their property tax bills, which some will. And some of the towns that might either have special billing requirements or they have a standing agreement with someone who actually prints, this will export it out so they can send it to their print shop and have the print shop do it. So it also needs to talk with whatever the local CAMA system is, which is the Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal Program. So the vast majority of the state uses NIMRIC because for the last 20-something years, that was also hosted by the state. We basically hosted the New England Municipal Resource Center, CAMA system, and Grand List software sort of all joined together. And then some towns have over time switched to their own CAMA vendors because they prefer to use something else. And we wanted to really focus back on our mission of the Grand List administration, and towns can choose whoever they want to use for their CAMA system. That being said, the vast majority still do use the NIMRIC system, and they've been fantastic partners in making sure this will work. We've also met with every other CAMA vendor and any other tax billing software vendor to make sure that the systems will talk to each other well before billing, because that we do not want July to be any more challenging than it normally is for printing property tax bills. Hell hath no fury like town clerks who cannot get their tax rates in time. Like I mentioned, another piece that PBR is responsible for is the lister education and training. I have to say this is like, we have a pretty small team of folks, and this is actually a huge amount of work that they take really seriously. As I said, for many years, it was basically we'd have sort of a series of one-off trainings that we would do. We travel around the state and do these trainings. But we've really been able to join forces with VALA, the Vermont Assessors and Listers Association, and with VLCT, and leverage things like Teams software, and now with Axiomatic to offer a lot more pieces at a lot more times of day in smaller chunks of time and record them and post them. Which has been fantastic. But in addition to these like actual concrete lister education programs that we offer, our district advisors are the field-based staff who spend the vast majority of their time on the road, meeting with towns, walking them through specific issues. Because a lot of these pieces might only come up once every couple of years. There might be some unique situation the lister doesn't know what to do. Or it might be like a process that they have to do once a year and that's it. So they also, in addition to our trainings, they always have district advisors are assigned to a set of towns in their region, and they are available to them all the time whenever they have any questions. And like I said earlier, so there is the Vermont Property Assessor Certification Program that we oversee. There are, like I said, there are offerings that PBR has. There's basically a way that they can also say, well, I came here from another state, but I took this similar class. You can replace that, or years of experience doing other appraisal. They can request to substitute that for our particular class. And it doesn't cost anybody anything to apply to that. I think it used to be $25, and it was actually costing us more to process checks than it was the $25. So, and we want to make it available to everybody. So we're happy to see an increase in interest in that for sure, but we've got a long way to go. And then, like I said, those the firms who do reappraisal work also apply to be on our approved list of appraiser firms or supervisors. So there's both the certification for the day-to-day appraisal work, and then there's the yes, you're on our approved list of firms to carry out reappraisals. On the next couple pages, 10 and 11, is a pretty deep dive into the equalization study that I think we've covered quite a bit here. If anyone has any, do you want me to take questions as we go, or should I just keep barreling? And if anyone has any questions,
I think if anyone has any questions, I will try to gently draw your attention.
Okay, great. So on page 11 is just the list of grand list categories. I think this might be helpful in a little bit when you hear from Rebecca and Jake about secondary residences, and I'll be here still as well. But Vermont has a lot of grand list categories, and some of them might be holdovers that we don't need anymore, or we might need some different categories. But this is the current way that we categorize property on the grand list. On page 12, I think it's just a really helpful sort of statewide total. The total number of properties in Vermont is 327,483. You can see the listed value at 88 billion versus the equalized value, which is 107 billion. And then that's again demonstrated at the bottom of page 13, the percent change increase values. And you can see.
I think we have different page numbers.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, probably. Okay.
It's one page ahead of you.
Okay. So there should be one table 4, listed and equalized education property values.
Yes, thank you.
So you can see for several years, you know, it was creeping up, the difference, that percent change in that final far right column. And then in the last 2 years, it really jumped up, which is not surprising to anyone. As Jake had in the slide we showed last week, the delta between the listed value and the sales price has really been dramatic.
I remember either you or Jake using a metaphor of a rising boat. Can you do that again?
I think what Jake was saying was that if you're a town that's an outlier, that your CLA is way out here and everyone else is kind of more up here, then you do have an issue. But because everybody's CLA dropped almost universally, then the lower tide sort of lowered all ships. So the total education spending is one thing, but the actual
So it doesn't impact tax rates the way it would if all the rates were different around the state?
Yes.
Okay.
We all sort of were impacted equally, and therefore, because we're on the statewide system,
None of us were.
it doesn't shoot up everyone's tax rates exponentially in and of itself. Right.
Thank you.
But all the boats are still afloat.
They're still technically floating. Might be running aground, but let's see.
Can I just make a quick comment? So I'm one of many towns that got a letter this month saying that we were required to do a reappraisal. And a lot of our taxpayers are absolutely convinced that their taxes are gonna go up because of this reappraisal. So I'm trying to explain to them, but they don't get it. They just, they're convinced that something's wrong with the grand list or,
Right.
somehow we've screwed up at the town office, but
Right. So the way I'm on a school board as well, so I've tried to sort of figure out how to articulate it. But the CLA is a factor that's supposed to adjust your value of your property. So it's either going to show up in your tax rate or in your value, but we're trying to get at the same thing. So it might seem like the tax rates are going to go up because of the CLA, but what it's telling us is actually the value of that property is listed way below what it should be. So if we were to reappraise more frequently and we had more houses for people to buy and the demand was lower, then it would stay kind of calibrated. But because the grand list value of their properties is so much lower than what the real estate market is showing. So if we go through reappraisal, right, and so then you're back at 100%. Your assessed value will be higher because it will be reflecting what it should be, but your tax rate is now not going to have that CLA impacting your tax rate. So the actual dollars that you'll have to pay may not change very much because it's only needing to collect the same amount. It's just right now, it's like a factor on top of a factor. And if you're reappraised and you're at 100% fair market value, you've got a pretty clear, 1-to-1, but I totally, yes, I even my mom listening to this testimony in VPR was like, you need to find a way to explain this better to people.
I hope she's listening.
We've been trying. So to that point, I'll just go by table number since I think I printed out a draft copy. Table 6, the statewide CLA by year. So this is sort of what we were getting at about the lower ships, right? So over time, right, sometimes the statewide CLA has been generally below 100, but pretty close to 100. Maybe it would go down a little bit. 2009 was probably the last time we saw kind of a crazy real estate market. So then in the last couple of years, right, we've gone from a statewide CLA of 93.2 and then down to 91.2, and then in 1 year down to 83.1. So we really have a statewide
Reappraisal problem.
reappraisal problem, right? And again, I feel like housing. We need, if we don't want our property tax rates to go up and we don't want the demand for houses in this lovely place to live to be so out of whack, we need to have more places people can buy. But yeah, so I think, for the purposes of this conversation, I think just keeping in mind that sort of statewide lowering of all ships figure is helpful, and having the historical representation. So then, like I said, I feel like I spent a fair amount of time on reappraisal with you folks. I'm happy to continue to go through that, but basically, as I said, towns get an annual appropriation, $850 per parcel every year. That's one of the grants that I'll walk through that we administer and send to the towns every year. The idea being that both the municipal grand list and the education grand list have skin in the game for maintaining the property tax values, and so that it would be sort of a shared responsibility, that the municipality wouldn't be on their own to pay for the reappraisal. They would get this annual appropriation. Hopefully sort of set it aside and maybe sort of set aside some on their own, so that when they do either want to reappraise or they get a reappraisal order as a result of their study, they have some money to carry out that reappraisal. And as we talked about last week, we sort of have a compounded because the number of reappraisals that have actually been happening every year has been about 16 or so a year. Which is already pretty lagging, even if you don't factor in the last couple of years of the hot real estate market. And we're really finding that part of the reason that this is so challenging is there's not enough appraiser firms to go around. And we think we've been hearing that having some sort of better consistency about what to expect might make it a little more enticing for firms to come to Vermont to do this work, or for people in Vermont to kind of create some homegrown ones. So basically, as the result of the equalization study that we just wrapped up, where the common level of appraisals and the coefficients of dispersion came out, those were due January 1, so those went out the week before Christmas. We're now in the window where towns can appeal that. So far I've heard from less than a dozen towns. We're expecting more, but they can actually appeal the results of this study. They can look at the sales we included, look at the sales we excluded, and then they can actually appeal to the director and say, I think you guys made a mistake. I think you should have included these. I think these sales were not arm's length. They should be excluded. So that's literally the window that me and my staff are in right now, between now and the end of January. So towns have 35 days from when we release the study until they can submit a formal appeal. And that appeal has to come from the select board, it has to be signed by the select board chair. So that's the piece we're in right now. So depending on that, some might end up having their equalization study results changed, and then maybe they will no longer be under reappraisal order this year. But so as a result of those appeals, later this spring, we will be sending out the formal final reappraisal order results based on this year's study.
Are you expecting more appeals because of the weird moment that we're in with real estate values? So that's not typical.
Right. So every year we get a few, and it is very much right. So it's a very transparent process. So the lister in this town put that sale in, and then our district advisor said, actually, I think we need to come out or whatever, or we do sales verification letters. You might, if you've ever bought or sold property in Vermont, you get a letter from, I think from me, that says, hey, did you sell it to a family member? Did you include any personal property? Things like that, because that can help us or the town determine that it actually, maybe it wasn't actually as straightforward at arm's length, or maybe it included farm equipment and things like that that really skewed the value. But yeah, what we're having a lot of towns asking this year is, we think it's this real estate market. We don't think our grand list is wrong. And that's the key to remember is like, this is a data analysis. So it really needs to be like we made a mistake or there's some sort of statistical change. And we're certainly not punishing towns in any way for not getting their reappraisals done, because they have to now get in line for a contractor. But yeah, there's a lot of that kind of, is PVR going to do something about this real estate market? And really what it is this is reflecting what's happening, for better or worse.
Right.
Good. Go ahead.
So I'm a realtor, is there a letter that goes along with that letter that you send out that explains why you're asking for the data?
There was a few months where apparently it wasn't going out. So
Okay.
folks were getting this form from the tax department, and it was
Yeah.
really upsetting. And we realized that it had not been getting the cover letter from me that's like, hey, this is, yeah.
Because I had a friend reach out and they were like, what? Why is the tax department reaching out to me?
Yeah,
They're a little freaked out.
very fair. Yes, we get that a lot. You don't want to.
Yeah, really.
I
Yeah,
said, fill it out and send it back.
thank you. Yeah, it's totally innocuous. If you don't fill it out, it's fine. But it's helpful to us and it's helpful, the towns also do their own a lot of the times.
That makes sense then.
And ideally, we would get all of that kind of information when the property transfer tax return is first filed, but that's not necessarily information that's available. Maybe the person filling out the PTTR doesn't know if it's a family member, I don't know. There's but yes, there
There
was a
is a
window of
letter.
time that we realized we were getting a lot of those questions.
Mhm.
And then we checked the software and like, oh, the nice letter from Jill that says, don't worry, but please fill this out. We would appreciate it. We promise it won't impact your property taxes.
Well, they were one of them.
Yeah.
Representative Anthony.
Thank you. Now, because, as you say, market-wide assessments versus market value are out of whack. But in an earlier time, I was worried that you folks might not be able to discover that a particular town was challenging your CLA and the underlying data, and then essentially saying, if you please take this one out, it's an outlier, and include this one. And the net result was maybe they went from mandatory reappraisal or a CLA of 82, they got it back up to 87. Are you confident you folks and your troops are quick enough to be able to figure out if a particular town is saying, look, I don't like this CLA, and neither does my select board, so can't we take this sale out and put this one in?
Yeah.
It's, in this environment, it wouldn't happen because it's so general. But in a more traditional environment, where towns move, but not everybody moves. I just want to be sure that kind of behavior is confined, if you will, or you folks are savvy enough that you say, no, I'm sorry, we're not taking that sale out.
I'm happy to say the folks who oversee the study have been doing this for over 20 years and are sticklers to a fault.
Thank you.
You do not want to cross the district advisors who've been doing this a while. They are very skeptical in a positive way, actually, skeptical in the right way.
Show me.
Yes. Yeah, so I think they've seen it all, and we give them a hard time sometimes because they do take reviewing every single sale so seriously. But the end result is that I feel like we can come to you folks with confidence in the data. So, yeah.
Jill, just looking at the table 7 there and the number of towns that sort of this past year, remarkably, it's really interesting to see that number that's between 10 and 20 is pretty consistent over the years there. But then all of a sudden this past year, there are now close to 100 towns that are going to get reappraisal notices just based on their COD.
Right, so.
My question is that a result of more high-value properties selling for way above their appraised value this past year or past 2 years?
I mean, that could certainly be part of it. And also different kinds of property within the town are demand are very different, right? So single family residences are incredibly high demand. And then you have vacant offices and commercial buildings that are listed way out of whack. So, so 71 of the expected reappraisal orders are based on both the CLA and the COD being out of whack. So that really means the whole thing is not, and then there's 28 that are just on the COD, which is a little high.
And I noticed, and last time we talked about this, I noticed how many of the communities who had the COD requiring them to get reappraisals had not reappraised for a very long time. And so I think under a different statutory provision, it wouldn't have been the COD, it would have been something else. And I think you mentioned that in your cover letter, that, rolling reappraisals are certainly a normal thing in lots of other places.
Yes.
So obviously this is a conversation we'll be having over the session, but like, what advice do you have for me about how to communicate with my select board members and listers as they have alarm about this moment? What should I be saying to help
Yeah, I think the
ease their anxiety?
Right, so the first would probably be trying to articulate that if your values are at 100%, your CLA is going to be at, is going to be at or close to 100%. So this sort of being at the mercy of what the market is doing is not ideal. What you want is you want your grand list to be up to date and as accurate as possible. And so from PVR's perspective, one of the big lessons from this, not that this is wrong, this is simply reflecting what's happening, is that we really need to think about making sure that reappraisals are happening more frequently and that towns are spending the time to keep their grand lists up to date, because then you won't be at the mercy of what the market is doing versus what you've got property listed at. So, and the other piece is, there might be some specific examples depending on the towns in your district, but like here in Montpelier, our CLA is like 74, which is terrifying, but our actual ed spending, the yield, all those other factors also factor in. So our tax rate is actually going to go up like 1.9%. So the CLA in and of itself is like one of the pieces that goes into that tax rate calculation. So the two things are, to the point, everyone's CLA is going down. So we're all in this, yes. And
I love the boat.
yes.
So, and I think, would welcome any thoughts about I think I'm hearing you say you all are well aware of the time it takes to find an appraiser at this time and suggesting might as well reach out to your neighbors and but any other thoughts about how to lay concerns around if folks get to yes, we know we need to reappraise, but it's gonna take us 3 years to do that, how to soften anxiety around that?
That's a great question. In the meantime, I would have them reach out to their district advisor because there's a whole lot of work and data updating they could do now to prepare. So the listers, if you know you're going to be reappraising in 3 years, say, there's a lot of great groundwork that the lister or assessor can be doing right now to set it up for it to be a successful reappraisal and save a lot of time and anxiety down the road. There's checking permits, there's, updating properties, there's things they can do to make sure their data is like ready to roll. And I think that would also frankly make it more appealing to a contractor if the town sees that they're going to take that time.
And their district coordinator can help support them.
Absolutely. Yep.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
I would love for us to move to current use if we can, knowing that we will have a lot more time to talk about.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's the next,
Yes.
whatever is next.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
what I saw to be next.
So, right, so current use has been, it was called the Working Lands program for a long time in the 70s and 80s. We call it the current use program because it's about valuing the land that's enrolled in the program at its use value rather than its listed fair market value. You'll also hear it referred to as the UVA, the Use Value Appraisal Program. That's kind of how FPR tends to refer to it. So essentially, the idea is that it has sort of these statutory guiding principles about what the program is to do. And it's about encouraging and protecting working lands in Vermont, so working agriculture and forest land. And the idea being that if you are a landowner who wants to enroll your land in current use, so you're going to get a pretty major property tax change because those acres that were enrolled are enrolled at the use value versus the listed value. In exchange for that, the state puts a contingent lien on the property. It's a deal, right? It's an exchange. So to ensure that the property continues to be used appropriately as it was enrolled originally, whether it's agriculture, forest, sugar, things like that. There is a current use advisory board that's appointed by the governor, and then there's also statutory appointees. So I'm a statutory appointee. There's folks from Forest Parks and Recreation, Agency of Agriculture. There are municipal officials, and the makeup of the board, according to the statute, has to have under 51% of, or maybe it's 51% or less of the people on the board cannot have land in the program. The idea being that it's not going to just be made up of folks who are enrolled in the program, but that there's sort of an equitable makeup. So the board has been chaired by a gentleman, a forester named John McLean, since the 80s, I think. He's absolutely fantastic and would be happy to come in and talk to you folks about the program. Their main role, it's twofold, is to sort of hear and discuss the program, any changes to the program, and then to set these use values. So for forestry, there are some pretty complex calculations about stumpage value and timber value and lease rates and things like that. For ag, and again, FPR would be much better equipped to articulate that. And then for the agriculture, they use things like milk prices, land rates, things like that. So there is a pretty comprehensive deep dive that the current use advisory board does to set those use values. So then essentially, if I am enrolling 10 acres of ag land, instead of it being valued at whatever the town that I'm in has it valued at, it'd be 10 acres times the ag use value, which I'm realizing, are those in here? Yes, okay, well, we have a TBD because the board is meeting on Monday to set the use values for the coming year, but we have the historic through 2022.
I'm embarrassed to say, I don't remember when the effective date was of the changes we made in current use last year. Do you have?
The reserve forest land,
Yes.
July 1 this year.
Was this?
I mean,
this year that we're living in, or this year that?
2023.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
all the sort of groundwork is happening right now, but they will be able to enroll the reserve forest land as of July 1
Okay,
of 2023.
thank you. So we wouldn't see any of that here.
Right, but we are, one of our charges from that language is that included in this report starting next year will be any reflection of reserve forest land. So,
And I have another question. So yesterday we were looking at our tax expenditure report from JFO, and we had a conversation about whether or not we should be thinking of this as a tax expenditure, and I'm curious your opinion on that.
use as a benefit program. It is articulated as both a tax expenditure, but also that there are economic impacts of the forest and agriculture that are not measured to sort of counter that expenditure. So I
Okay, thank you.
plead the fifth on that one.
Yep. Sorry to jump that one.
Yeah, I mean, what it is it's foregone tax revenue, absolutely. It is foregone education fund revenue, and then the general fund actually hold harmless payment that we send out to towns. So if your municipality has property that's enrolled in the current use program, the state will actually reimburse the municipality every year in what we call the hold harmless payment. I think it's up to 17 million this past year, so that the municipality is held harmless for the current use enrollment. So it's $65 million a year of foregone revenue.
And have you seen, when you look at growth curves and changes in acreage enrolled in the various categories, do you ever look at it by county or by?
Yeah, FPR really does, because they actually have county foresters assigned to each.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the land is forest, or at least at some point crosses their eyes. The agriculture only parcels are the only ones that don't get reviewed by FPR, and they still often see them. So they have some great heat maps about enrollment by category in the counties. Yeah, and I'm sure Keith Thompson at FPR is a fantastic presenter. Has some really good ways to show that data. Yeah.
Just to follow on, does the valuation and consequently the tax expenditure vary regionally across forest land? It does.
Maybe not so much forest land, honestly, because
ag.
but ag definitely,
Yeah.
right? So I think, so timber production in Concord is just as valuable as timber production in Bennington County, but the overall current use savings by county is definitely not.
Except when it comes to withdrawal, the site value will vary.
Yes.
Independently of the stumpage value.
That's
I just,
Yep.
I'm worried, I worry about people gaming this, and I understand the withdrawal price also would reflect what the state has in it, so to say, over the years that it was enrolled. So
Right.
maybe that's a break on people gaming the system.
Yeah.
I'm sure the temptation is there for people who have held it for 3 generations and finally decide to cash out.
Right. Right.
So
Go ahead.
Would now be a time to ask about what happens when you remove your land from current use and sell?
Sure, yeah. So, I did want to mention quickly, so the last 2 years, the record number of applications in current use, and it's largely transfers. Again, just another sort of symptom or reflection of the real estate market. A lot of property changing hands, people putting it into trusts, but it was a very busy couple of years for current use. So
And in current use under one owner, transferring to land in current use under another owner?
Yeah.
Okay.
a lot more transfers. There's only so much new land that can be enrolled, but there was a lot of transfers. Right, and I did want to mention too, in addition to the use value for the acreage, farm buildings that are enrolled in the program, and this can include farm employee housing, is taxed at 0. So there is also a very significant benefit for landowners who have working farm buildings or farm employee housing. Those can be enrolled in the program and be valued at 0 for property tax purposes. Yes, so, sorry.
And I don't know if this is a question for you or folks who are more with this, but the withdrawals, have you seen any of those withdrawals? Are you aware of them being at all related to switching land into cannabis cultivation?
We've had some inquiries about it. I think the requirement for that is so small that, it would be pretty small if so. I feel like I can think of 3 landowners that asked us about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would epidemic.
No.
Great, thank you.
No, but I think it might increase depending on what folks choose to use their property for. But it sounds like they have to already be enrolled in the program under existing qualifications in order to then change the use of that acreage or the building for cannabis. Yeah, we probably will start tracking that. But like I said, I feel like we've had inquiries, but I can't think of an instance where it's actually been converted.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find that out. All right, so the land use change tax, yes. So like I said, the exchange of having your property in the program, if you have your land in the program, it has to be eligible when it's initially enrolled. And if it's forestry, they have to have a forest management plan that's approved and managed by Forest Parks and Recreation. They have to renew that every 10 years. They can do site visits to inspect it, and they can remove land from the program and impose the land use change tax if, for example, folks cut contrary to their forest management plan. And then for agriculture, one of the ways that folks can get removed from the program is if they we are alerted from Agency of Ag that they have not met the water quality mitigation standards that Ag oversees. But generally speaking, once you have your land in the program, the lien remains until the land use change tax is paid. You can withdraw your land from the program, but the lien remains. So we have a lot of folks in that gray area that they have withdrawn the land from the program, but the lien is still on it. So they're paying their full property tax liability, but they cannot have the lien removed until they pay the land use change tax. The land use change tax is currently, it's a penalty. It changed pretty significantly in 2015, and we've actually been analyzing because we think there were some flaws in that calculation back then that are really causing some challenges now. So I'd love to I can talk to you folks about that. So the idea being that if you're removing land from the property, you have to pay a penalty to either get the lien removed or if you have developed it, right? So that's the other piece, is if your land is no longer eligible to be in the program, if you've developed the land, if you've stopped managing your forestry by the forest management plan, then you can be discontinued from the program and you would have to pay that land use change tax within 30 days. So it's a 10% tax on the value of the property. And if you enrolled property, right? So it wouldn't be your entire if you had land that was excluded from the program. If it's a portion of the parcel, the lister needs to value that portion of the withdrawn piece as a standalone parcel, and then it's 10% of that. So that was the big change in 2015. So that requires the lister or assessor to do sort of a standalone hypothetical valuation of that piece that's coming out, and then the land use change tax is 10% of that. And our understanding is the idea of that is really trying to penalize the sort of fragmentation of parcels. In practice, it's really challenging to administer. The listers and assessors have to kind of do this odd valuation. It's very disparate across the state as far as what that looks like.
I mean, inconsistent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think is disparate because even the listers and assessors will tell, they do these differently depending on the situation. It's also, we haven't really seen that it's impacted behavior one way or the other. But I digress. So that is the current process. So if we find out or if we are removing a portion of the parcel, we send a request to the lister and they value that parcel and then it's 10% of that fee. So the landowner can appeal that valuation at the local level, and then they can also appeal the land use change tax to us.
Yeah.
The appeal can also be taken by PVR.
Yes. Yes.
Good.
Right. It's just like any other
Yeah.
valuation. Right. So am I answering your question?
How often are you finding out after the fact that a property has been developed and you end up in sort of an enforcement sort of situation versus someone comes to you and say, hey, we're gonna do this and I need to pay my land use change tax?
Yeah, so PVR doesn't do any sort of site visits or any kind of inspection. So we are we are counting on the lister and assessor to let us know, hey, these people built a brand new barn, or the landowner to let us know, hey, we tore down that barn and that should be taken off our. So there is sort of a constant communication with the listers and assessors. And if there's any question, they or our district advisor could go out and see. In forestry, it's much more managed because there are county foresters who are assigned to maintain that. And now that there's things like LiDAR and drones and things, we can see if somebody has clear cut 5 acres in the middle of their forest to build a dirt bike track, for example.
Right, yeah, and I assume that does happen.
Yes. Yes. So we don't have really the resources or to like go out and do like site inspections. It generally comes across our desk either because the landowner has asked questions about what they can and can't do, or a lister or assessor has noticed it, and then we can reach out to the landowner and ask them to change their enrollment.
Or county forester.
Or the county forester will let us know, because they actually get to sort of tell us, and then we will manage the administrative part of the current use, but FPR does the actual oversight and determinations about meeting the forest management.
How often do you unenroll parcels because, or charge land use change tax on an owner because they have not met their forestry plan?
Gosh.
You hear from a couple of county foresters every year that they've got people who enrolled who are not.
Yeah, I bet it's.
They've tried everything they can to get them to do
Yeah.
their plan.
It's less than 20 a year. I bet it's probably more like 10 or so, because I think they try really hard to keep that from happening in the first place, right? To really sort of support them in complying rather than, we have an occasional bad actor, but maybe once every year or so. Generally speaking, the county forester is working with the landowner to try to meet their requirements. Yeah.
And does Agland get that same kind of visiting?
No, they don't. So in the 2015 changes, one of the other pieces that did come out of that is that there is a required annual agriculture certification that every year we send out a mailing to every agriculture parcel and say, this is what our current enrollment information is. This is what we have for you on file. You sign and respond to affirm that that is still accurate, or if you have any changes. And we do have the ability to withdraw people from the program if they don't submit that, or if they say, yeah, I built new houses in my field or whatever. So we have actually withdrawn people from the program if we've sent them multiple reminders to send in this ag certification and they have not done so. We've removed people from the program. In the first year, I think, with the first year or so, it really did sort of catch a lot of folks that just weren't, it wasn't really on the radar screen that they needed to sort of keep in compliance. And so it did actually alert a lot of people, oh, I'm not eligible anymore. But now, we mail this out to 8,000 parcels every year. So there's always several hundred that then we do a second mailing to be like, no, we really mean it. We just need you to sign this and send it back to us. Yeah. So it's pretty minor. It's a pretty minor.
If you do remove them, do they immediately revert back to their full tax value, or their tax bill will be full value, but do you also send them a bill for the lien, or is that up to them if they want to get out of the lien?
No, yeah, we will send them the alert of what their land use change tax would be due. Yeah,
So if they're taken out of the program by PVR or the town, they are immediately charged for the.
right. If they,
Check tax.
right, and in those cases, if they can remain in that sort of gray area that they're withdrawn from the program, but the sort of balance is on there and the lien is on there until they pay it. They don't have to do the 30 days. The 30 days is like you've developed it or you've cut contrary, you've got 30 days to pay that.
Got it, okay, thank you.
And just want to check my understanding, if you cut contrary to your plan, the entire parcel is unenrolled, even if you have so if you have 5,000 acres and you don't follow your land use management plan and cut contrary on 10 acres, it's not that the 10 acres is unenrolled, it's the entire parcel.
And for 5 years after, they're not allowed to put it back in. Right. Yeah, yeah. Let's see, land use change tax, what did we not cover? So, yeah, my table 14 is just sort of an idea of the number of withdrawals each year for land use change tax. It's not really designed to be a revenue generator. It's really designed to be sort of a penalty. One piece I did want to add is the way the statute reads. For every land use change tax dollar that we actually collect, that actually gets paid, the town official gets 50% of that up to $2,000. So the idea being, they're the ones doing the evaluation and submitting it to PVR. They've spent their time and resources to do so. They should get a piece of the land use change tax that's collected. It's tough because in a lot of cases, folks might have that land use change tax that's outstanding, but it hasn't actually been paid, and the local officials only get what we actually are able to collect. So quarterly, we sort of run, all right, what have we collected? And the town gets 50% up to 2,000 of the land use change tax. So there is a cost sharing or a revenue sharing with the towns for land use change tax, because it is a lot of work. Should I keep going?
Yeah, thank you.
So property tax exemptions, like I mentioned, I think these are things you folks are probably pretty familiar with. There's multiple statutory exemptions that are just statewide, non-negotiables. Most recently, last year, the legislature added a new exemption for property owned by Native American tribes or owned by a nonprofit that is organized for the tribe's benefit. So that's a newer exemption that's now included. And then, like I said, the municipality can do locally voted exemptions. So one pretty common version of that is there's a $10,000 exemption for veterans. That's a statewide exemption. And the town can actually vote to expand that up to $40,000 of exemption if they want. That's a pretty common locally voted exemption. And if they vote the exemption locally, the town is responsible for making up that difference in the ed fund.
That's not for all veterans, it's just for disabled veterans, right?
Gosh, I didn't think it was just yes, it's disabled, or, yeah, okay.
I have a question about this. I actually just got a question from a constituent this morning about the fact that state and municipal governments are named, but county governments are not.
I wish I had my green book in front of me because maybe it does say that, but
I know county governments,
they are not exempt.
Not name county governments specifically in statute, though there's an assumption that,
Right,
they would be included under state.
right, like a courthouse and things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So have they been paying property tax?
No, they've been sort of going through a municipal process.
Okay.
Regular.
Okay. So next on my list is tax increment financing. Did I hear correctly? You folks are talking about that later today?
In greater depth.
I will be brief because I know we have a lot of other things we want to hear from Rebecca and Jake about. PVR's role is to help towns with the calculations and to manage and oversee the calculations. And we also work closely with BEPC on the administrative rules related to tax increment financing. We do have the data folks in PVR work closely with BEPC and the towns to make sure that the tax increment financing and the increment that's calculated every year is correct and correctly captured. So we don't have BEPC, I believe, oversees the TIF program, but we certainly work closely on the financial calculation aspect of that and supporting towns in doing that, and then collecting that as part of our software. And then, like I said, there's a good deal of information in here and on our website related to homestead declarations and the property tax credits. There's also municipal property tax rates. I feel like now I'm realizing it's 10 o'clock. I know you guys have other things you want to talk about.
We're okay, this is important.
Okay, thank you. And then we do also administer the municipal grant programs, like I said. So the hold harmless payment for current use.
Wait, can we pause for a
Yeah.
Nick and Rebecca, how much time were you expecting to have for,
I think we could be pretty brief.
what does that mean?
Yeah.
What?
Like,
Whatever's left.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
And not to put you on the spot, Jake, were there any particular highlights about homestead declarations or property tax credits this year that we as a tax department should mention? I haven't spent a lot of time digging into those particularly. No? Okay.
I have a question about homestead declarations.
Okay.
Property tax credits. Whether or not someone files a homestead declaration, and the relationship between the municipality as sort of a, enforcing homestead declarations and the state in enforcing homestead declarations. It's not really like, speak to that issue, please.
Yeah, it's challenging, right? So there is we call it the lister response, but basically there's sort of a back and forth communication between the municipal officials and our taxpayer services division that oversees processing those. So either entity could say, I think this should be a homestead, can you look into it? Or I don't think this should be, can you look into it? So the tax department has more resources at our fingertips as far as like DMV records and other income tax and other things that the taxpayer services can look into. So the listers can certainly say, I don't think this person is, should be getting a homestead. And they'll say that to taxpayer services, but then taxpayer services might look into it and confirm it, or they might say, yeah, they're right, and they might flip that back over. And we hear a lot of sort of angst from some of the local officials that they never hear resolutions, so they think that taxpayer services is like ignoring them. That's not the case. It's individual income tax information. We can't let them know what the resolution was of our looking into that.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
So what we've built into our new VTPI system is it is going to let the lister know that taxpayer services has reviewed it and taken an action. It doesn't say what it is, but it'll at least say, got it, received. And so we're hoping that will cut back on that, because there is frustration at the local level. They're like, fine, I'm not going to bother doing this if the taxpayer services isn't going to look into it, but they do check them all and they do just have other resources at their fingertips. But
Thank you very much.
let's see. So I think it's important for this committee especially to, I'm skipping ahead. It's my page 33, municipal grant programs. I'm not sure what.
34.
Thank you, 34, thank you. So these are the statutory appropriations that we keep sort of touching on that go out through the tax department to the towns. So there's the current use hold harmless payment. Like I said, that's a general fund payment. It's up to 17.7 million that is distributed to each of the towns based on our calculation of the impact of those parcels in each town being enrolled in the current use program and the foregone municipal revenue because of that. The pilot for state-owned buildings, probably pretty straightforward. We work with buildings and general services to ensure we have that list up to date. So we do send those pilot payments to municipalities. I think it's prorated a little bit depending on what the appropriation is, but I think it's pretty on par. I think it's about 97% maybe. The reappraisal and grand list maintenance fund, that's the piece I was mentioning about the $850 per parcel. That hasn't changed for quite a while, but the idea is that that payment goes out to each town to support their sort of reappraisal fund and then other costs related to maintaining their grand list. So those go out to the town every year. They also get $1 per parcel assistance with the equalization study. So that's another, you'll hear us call them like the per parcel payments. That's what those pieces are. And then the lister education appropriation is an annual appropriation that comes to PVR, and then we use that to pay for the trainings and to contract with the IAAO, Vermont Assessors and Listers Association, and BLCT to offer multitudes of trainings all year at no charge for listers. So for example, they can come to that 4-day data collection where they can come through my house and they can stay at the Capitol Plaza when they're here for the training and they can get reimbursed for that. And they can also take these IAAO national courses and get reimbursed for that. So the idea is that we really are trying to make it so that listers and assessors can get all these trainings at no charge. And so that was a annual appropriation from the legislature. It used to be another per parcel payment that just sort of disappeared. And so over time, PBR would see the same 25 people at every training every year, but then there's hundreds of people who we never saw. And where did that go? So now we feel like we're able to reach a lot more people and offer it a lot more broadly because of these partnerships. So for example, with the reappraisal demand, we are working closely with VLCT to actually do a really intensive supportive training for the boards of civil authorities and the towns and the select boards. And they will actually do regional meetings targeted at where sort of some of these towns are to make sure we're like really getting in where they need us to be. They can be in the evening so that it can be accessible for select boards and listers and assessors to participate. So the request for list value adjustment. So for several years, there has been a $100,000 a year appropriation. So this is, I hope I can make sense of this. So if a town defends a value up to the highest level, it has defended that value, and they have, and it ends up either settling or they lose that advocacy. The impact on the town's education fund liability can be pretty significant. So for example, if you have a really high value commercial property in your town and you want to defend that value, you are going to need to hire an appraisal expert, you're going to need to hire an attorney, and you're going to need to defend that value against what might be a pretty formidable opponent. And you're taking on a lot of that cost yourself as a municipality to defend that value. And you're defending it not only for your municipal grand list, but for the education grand list as well. So a lot of towns are finding themselves in a really tough spot. Like, we're going to just eat this huge expense and we'll be out that money. And maybe we'll see it on our municipal grand list, but it still wouldn't pay for that. So the way that the nature of that responsibility was really incentivizing like settlements for a lot lower than they should be, or towns saying, we can't expend $25,000 for an attorney and an appraiser. So the idea of this appropriation is that if a town does find themselves that they have defended the value, and it's usually pretty high value, right? These are like hydros, ski resorts, things like that. Those are the ones that we're seeing across our desk right now. And they can demonstrate that they've followed best practices, they met the standards for their valuation. They can apply to get their education tax liability removed from their following year property tax liability so that they can sort of be made whole for defending that value. It still doesn't pay for those sort of extraneous costs, but it at least sort of says, yes, we as a state share that responsibility. And if you do defend it appropriately, we've got you covered. And we did get that dollar increase to a $1 million appropriation, because if you think about it, at any given year, there's a lot of situations like this. And the more that the sort of word got out, I think a lot of towns were like, why would I bother if I'm going to get a slice of the $100,000, because it's prorated depending on who applies. So like there might be one entity that was a pretty major settlement that's going to eat up that whole slice of the pie. So it wasn't really worth town's energy. So this year, I'm happy to report, for better or worse, we are going to use up all of that $1 million. We have many towns that have defended very high value properties appropriately and are going to now get made whole for their education fund liability this year.
Are there situations where the legal power of the state and the tax department would be more appropriate to be defending?
Yeah, so
valuation?
there is a current methodology for hydro dams, specifically the Great River Hydro, right? So like the Attorney General's office and our staff, and we actually host a contract for that contractor to do those valuations and then defend them. I think that has made a big difference, because the actual towns these dams are in, it's like Barnet, Rockingham, they're not places that can necessarily do this on their own. So based on that model, we actually, last year, the legislature passed this state appraisal litigation assistance program that will basically give PBR the ability to offer that for other high value commercial properties to see how that goes.
And you're just standing that up now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes, and we're coming, the ask was that we come back to the legislature with an appropriation request for that. So yeah, we have found that does make a big difference. And there is economy of scale in having a state contractor who's an expert in these specified, hydro dam valuation is a international like expertise. You don't have like somebody hanging out in your neighborhood who happens to have that valuation. You need people who can defend these. So yes.
Thank you. Rep. Mason.
It seems as a general rule, for lack of a better expression, hydro dams are always contentious. They generally, the power company says one, town says the other.
Yes.
This explanation is good, but my recollection is.
Yes, and there's also flowage easements. So there's lots of towns impacted above and below a dam that have a vested interest in those values as well. And yeah. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's a great example of sort of this model of kind of sharing the burden can really pay off for some of these smaller towns rather than leaving everyone to go it alone. Let's see. So I'm down on my last couple pages. The real estate transaction taxes, like I said, I think this probably goes without saying, but the same way that the number of sales that we saw every year for the study was pretty high, the volume of property transfer tax revenue also has gone up significantly in the last couple of years, which is good news. So that is captured on table 19. And you can see over time how that has pretty exponentially gone up. So there's also a land gains tax that did have some statutory changes recently, which is why the number changes a little bit in the last couple of years. But that has definitely gone back up again. I'm looking at table 20.
I think that's table 21 for us.
Is it? Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
I clearly am trying a little too hard to save paper because I didn't make nice reports for you folks and I used a draft version of my report. And then there's the acronyms and then like I said, on our website, and I did send it to Sorsha, I'm happy to send it to anyone else, but there's like the link to the supplemental data. So that's all the tables that used to be the last probably 50 pages of this report. That's like I said, the current use savings by town, homestead declaration property tax credits by town, municipal and effective tax rates by town. And I think it's also broken out by county and then by town. So that data is very much still there and still very digestible. We just have it as PDFs and Excels on our website. And if there is anything particular that folks want, I'm happy to find it for you.
And I'm sorry, go ahead. Did you say Sorsha has those forms?
It's on the link's on the website under Jill's name.
Okay, thanks.
I think that concludes my.
Representative Beck, you usually have like 1,000 questions. Like, and I'm feeling nervous that you're just sitting there.
No, I'm good.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Anthony?
Going back to pilot, in this kind of real estate market where some communities have just recently reappraised in a volatile market and some have not, are the pilot payments in any way sensitized to the CLA and the dispersion across communities who happen to own municipal buildings or state buildings or whatever?
I honestly don't know. I feel like those values have stayed pretty static with pretty minimal change year over year. Like I said, it's a prorated appropriation, so they're not getting 100% of that. I will find out.
Just across communities, because
that's a good question.
Obviously communities are in a different state, if you like, of reappraisal cycle. That leads me to my second interest in this. Given the shortfall between the communities that need reappraisal and the number of appraisers, there's obviously a queue. Mm-hmm. And given the fact that the state has had an increasing interest in, if you will, what happens at local valuation, is there increased role in the state for deciding the order in which communities will be brought up to 100%? I leave it at that.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is a combination of we were already kind of crumbling under the system, and then this latest was really shining a spotlight on
as in communities that are both CLA earning and COD.
Yeah, and then grand lists that are 10 years old plus. I think it's time we really need to step in to figure out how to support municipalities better, because
that's politically difficult to say you go first and you go third.
Right.
But still, there is a obvious state interest in how fast you bring this up.
Yes, yes. And how to make it more appealing for more folks, or to make it more stable for folks who can carry out this work. Because at the end of the day, I think a lot of towns would be happy to reappraise and are waiting in line. But if we don't have people who will take that work on, they're
I
still.
haven't had an appraiser in my community for 2.5 years. An assessor, I should say.
Back on table 20, which for me is the net revenue for property transfer tax table. Do you have data that you point me to or send on what the sort of categories of the values of the homes that property transfer tax was based on? Perhaps how many are over $1 million even?
Oh,
Perhaps.
I will find out.
Thanks.
I mean, I'm sure we can, at the very least, by dollar figure, right? We can certainly articulate yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else I can?
I'm excited to go into the backup table.
And I'm happy to come back on any one of these to dig in.
Yeah, and definitely, we'll find time for you to come back on the current use piece that you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Shelley.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What? Yeah, that's a great idea. Saoirse, we're having a morning break. So we're gonna take a 5-minute break before we start our next section of the agenda. So let's be back here at 10:25, but like actually at 10:25.